next to it inside. And so we slowly change the world around the user and have a kind of smooth transition to a virtual environment. And at the end, we are in a completely different place, but the user can still relate the objects to each other. So that's the concept of our smooth transition. And we once again take a look at the substitutional environment right now. So we first start in the replica and can look around, and so that when we switch an object, like this desk, for example, we can do this stepwise. Like you can see the desktop screen still has a stone texture. We can shortly after replace it with a flower or something else like that. And the user really can relate the objects to each other. And once he's in the environment, he knows exactly, this object is a wall. I can't walk through this. So it might prevent those cases like the zombie example at the beginning where one would run through a wall. So that's the concept of the smooth immersion, and now I'm going to explain what big topics this really is and how many different ways there are to implement this kind of transition. So if we want to get from a replica to a virtual environment, we have many different points to focus on. For example, the replica itself. We could either build a model-based replica where we have to build everything hand by hand and have a very detailed replication of the room, but have to do this in a complicated way, so we really have to build it. But afterwards, we can use the replica-based model really easily and can use it for tests and so on. But there's a problem of the location. For example, we couldn't show this replica to you here right now at this convention in the demo section because we are bound to the place we built the replica. So we could build a replica here, but it would be very cost efficiently. So there's another method like a video-based replica. We could transfer a video stream to the head-mounted display and have something more like an augmented reality at first. We could overlay graphics onto the video screen and slowly overlay things, and would walk from a real world to an augmented reality, to an augmented virtual reality, and finally to a virtual environment. So that are two interesting points we could focus on. Another point would be the transition itself. So we could exchange the objects in the room in a geometric way or a visual way or even in a mix of both. And we can look at the interactivity of the transition. So for example, we could have a non-interactive transition where the user simply puts on the head-mounted display and the process will slowly go on before his eyes, but he doesn't have an influence in it. So the world around him changes, but he can't influence it. Another way would be an active transition, where the user can directly interact with the environment. So for example, he could point at a chair right there and press a button, and the chair will change to something else. So he actively has to do something. A third approach would be a reactive interaction, where the world changes according to what the user is doing. For example, if he looks at an object or gets closer to it, so the world is reacting on the user's behavior. So these are three different ways how we could use the interactivity of the transition. So as we can see, we have many different points we could focus on by building a smooth immersion. And in our experiment, we choose to use a model-based replica. We exchange the objects in a geometric way and use the reactive kind of transition. How exactly this will be done will be shown in a following video. So, as you can see, we have me in a replica of our virtual laboratory. You can look around and can still interact with the objects in the laboratory. So, for example, I'm getting close to the desk there and can even touch the objects a little bit. And so at first the user can get a sense of the user interface and the replica itself and walk around a little bit and get comfortable. And after that we can start the process of the smooth immersion by pressing a button or some kind of sort. So right now I'm pressing it, and from here on the smooth immersion will start. As you can see, there's now growing some grass on the floor and the ceiling disappeared, and there are many different changes happening around the user, and he looks around and wants to see what is happening here, and whoa, the desk changed, and now there are bushes in the room next door, so it's a kind of very interesting process going on. And the user is looking around and tries to see all the things happening to him. So we had this, so as you can see, there are many different things happening, and at the end the user will be in a completely different environment, like the walls disappeared now, and he can look in a far landscape. And how exactly we implemented this method will be shown in the next video. I will just cut this off here. So we have now a top view of the laboratory, and as you can see, the transition starts now, and I'm looking now in the direction of the door area. And now things behind me start to change. Now I'm turning around and looking at the window area, and the door area will start to change. So we implemented our smooth immersion so that the things would only change if the user is not looking at them. We wanted to do this to avoid objects disappearing and appearing right in front of his eyes, because we thought that might cause problems and make the world more disbelievable. So as you can see, the user walks around, the environment changes around him, and shortly after he will be in the virtual environment. So yeah, now we based our experiment upon these videos and built our hypothesis on this smooth immersion. We thought that the user had a better increased reality judgment and a better virtual experience by doing this kind of smooth immersion, and also thought that his attention to the virtual environment would be greatly increased. So how exactly did we do this? We wanted to test the transition on the user's presence and their experience, so we conducted between subject design with 33 participants, and did this by doing a questionnaire-based kind of thing. So the first of these two questionnaires we used was the reality judgment and present questionnaire. This was a test with 17 questions, which could be rated on an 11-point Likert scale. And very nice about this questionnaire was that the questions were formed into groups, which formed a score, which was related to some psychological effects. So it was very nice to see those things. The first of these scores was the reality judgment, where the score indicated how realistic the world felt to the user. The second one was the internal and external correspondence, where it was about how logically the world was to the user. For example, the external correspondence was if the world was kind of the virtual world reflected the real world in a kind of logical way, while the internal correspondence was more about the world itself. So, for example, if we have some kind of magic world and can do some magic stuff, how logically is the magic done, and so on. And the third point was the attention and absorption. Here, a high score would indicate that the user was really focused on what was happening around him and really absorbed, while a lower score would indicate that he was kind of bored and didn't have much attention at what was going around him at all. The second questionnaire we used was the Visceral Experience test. Here, once again, we had 9 questions, which could be rated on a 5.1 Likert scale, and 5-point Likert scale. And once again, the questions were grouped to form scores which were related to psychological effects. So the first of these was the storytelling, but since there was no kind of story in our experiment, we kind of changed those questions to get a look at the consistency of the user's general emotional state. The second score was the active score. This one was about the self-embodiment of the users. So did they really feel that they were inside this virtual environment, or did they feel kind of out of place in this world? The third one was the task completion. Here the users had to rate, the score indicated how the user interface and the world was appropriate for for completing the tasks ahead, while the last content was about the sensory content. Here the score indicated the quality of the sensory stimuli the users experienced throughout the tests. So in the following I'm showing you how we conducted our experiments. First of all, we had the users fill out a pre-questionnaire where they had to give out some general information and do a simulation sickness questionnaire and so on. And after that, we had them do 3 simple tasks in a replica environment. The tasks weren't really, They were just there to have the users do something and not really relevant to the results. And after that, we had them fill out the 2 questionnaires I've showed you before. After that, we once again had the users do the same 3 tasks, but this time in a different virtual environment of this forest. And after that, once again, let them fill out the 2 questionnaires. So our test condition was the virtual environment of the forest, and here we held our between-subject experiment because we had 3 different kind of groups which entered this virtual environment in a different way. So for our results, we took the questionnaire of the replica as a kind of ground zero, where we got the user's personal biases on this, the questions, and afterwards looked at the difference to the questionnaire in the virtual environment. So since questionnaires tend to be kind of noisy, we wanted to get to ground zero and look at the changes at what happened from the replica to the virtual environment. So in the following, I'm going to show you the 3 groups we had. The first one had a direct immersion into the forest environment, so they simply put on the head-mounted display and were inside this forest. The second group could switch by pressing a button from the replica to the virtual environment, so they could first look around a bit, press a button, and abruptly jump into the other environment, while the third group had to do the smooth immersion, which I showed you in the video before. So now I'm going to show you the 3 tasks we had. In the first one, we can see the user in the forest environment, and he has to collect some orbs floating in the air. So we can simply walk through them and collect them. And we had some very nice observations while the users had to do these tasks. So the objects are placed really close to walls or other visual objects. And it was very interesting to see how the users reacted when they got close to those objects. For example, we had one user who couldn't relate these wood areas which represent the walls in our laboratory at all, and he just walked through them. So he had a direct immersion and couldn't really relate where he was in this example. The second task was very simple too. We simply had a red path on the floor which the users had to follow. And this is very easily in the replica because he simply has to follow the path and there's no really difficulty. But this changes once we repeat this task in the virtual environment. Now, once again, we have the red path which the user has to follow. But soon after, the path will lead through some virtual objects like the fireplace you can see on the right or the tent behind it. And it was very nice to see how the users reacted to these kind of difficulties. So now the path leads to a tent, and the users were thinking, what should I do now? Should I walk around this tent? Should I go over it? It was really interesting to see how they reacted to this. So the third task of our experiment was once again to get the users to really react with their environment. In this task, we've hidden a paper inside the replica of the room, and the users had to search for it. And it was very interesting to see because the users had to get really close to objects, look under desk, and so on. And many users who had experience with virtual reality before thought, this replica can't be mapped that right. I can't look under this desk because I'll bump my head into the desk or something like that. So there were many different reactions according to the experience of the users. So we had to look around the desk, and the piece of paper was hidden under this desk, so the users really had to crawl under it and got a code word there, which they could read. So those were the 3 tasks we tested, and after that we had the results from the 2 questionnaires, which I'm going to explain to you now. So as I've said, we only looked at the difference in the scores. So value of 0 means that the users didn't found any difference from the replica to the virtual environment. While a better score, a positive score would mean that they had a positive change from the replica to the virtual environment, and a negative score would be the opposite. So let's take a look at the reality judgment sections from the reality judgment and presence questionnaire, where we have the group who had the direct immersion. So it was very interesting since the median of the score was basically 0. So the user didn't see any change in the reality judgment from the replica compared to the virtual environment, which is kind of strange since replicas are normally very good for reality judgment and are felt really realistic to the user. So we thought there would have been a lower score in this point. For the switch immersion, we see that there was a negative value of the median and the scores decreased, as well as in the smooth immersion by 1 point, for example, in this. But in this score, we didn't find any statistically significant values, scores. So we looked at the internal and external correspondency, and here we also got a negative value in all 3 groups, but there was no kind of significance. The third group of the attention and absorption was kind of interesting, because here we can see that the switch immersion had a median of 0, while the direct and the smooth immersion had a better value of the attention focused on what was happening around them. And we even found a statistically significant value for the smooth immersion and the switch immersion. So it showed that the attention was more focused on the smooth immersion than on the immersion with the jump. So we once again did this for the visual experience test. And here we had the part of the storytelling and didn't find any interesting results, as well as for the active group. But in the task completion, we once again had very interesting results. As you can see, the direct immersion started with a higher score, the switch immersion with a value of 0, and the smooth immersion had a negative score. So the task completion was slowly decreased with the higher complexity of the immersion. So we had a negative tendency and also find a significant value at the direct and the smooth immersion. So it was kind of interesting to see that. The last of our groups was the sensory content, and sadly we didn't find a statistically significant tendency here either. But we think that there might be the kind of tendency if we would look into it more and have a another experiment more focused on it with perhaps more participants and so on, and want to focus on this group in later experiments. So that was the smooth immersion I have introduced to you. We looked into the smooth immersion in itself and the many possibilities there were to look at it. We also found out that the smooth immersion can increase attention to the virtual environments and that it aids perception in those. So that was our initial experiment, and I want to conclude my talk with this. Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes for questions.
Please, I'll remind you to use the microphones.
Hi, Alberto Simeone. I have a question. So first of all, thank you for your talk and for making substitutional environment a thing. So my question is, you said you didn't explore the idea of replacing objects while the person were looking at them. I remember at the top of my head, in several movies you can see scenes where like a person is holding something that then becomes like a serpent or something that could be potentially dangerous. And I wanted to just ask you, what are your thoughts on that? If this substitution happens while the person is holding the object, if that could be dangerous, or what strategies would you use to avoid that?
I think it's a very interesting way to look at this, direct changes in front of the user. In our case, we wanted to not have those changes happening right before him, but it's a very interesting concept which we could test in different experiments. So we want to see what kind of different ways are there for the user to react on these conditions. And it would be very interesting to see what happens if the things are changing in front of him in a more gradual way. So if a snake appears, for example, something like this.
Hi, Rob Lindeman from the HIT Lab, New Zealand. Can you go back to your charts?
Yes, I think so.
So my question mainly is around, so you show the difference.
Yes, where exactly?
The box plots, yes.
The box plots. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one's fine.
For
so
the
maybe the previous one, maybe the previous slide.
The previous, yes.
Yeah, so this shows the difference from the pre and post, right?
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
we use the...
So can you talk about the absolute? So like, for instance, is the blue higher or lower in terms of reality? So I understand the difference, but if you can compare the blue, green, and yellow on absolute, like, where would they be? Like the post, if we just look at post, which one would be higher or lower, the score? Does that make any sense?
Kinda, I guess. So as you can see, the score would be higher, for example, if we look at the last group for the blue point, the virtual environment would have been a higher score compared to the replica. So, for example, the score of the replica for the last group in the direct immersion would have a lower score, while the virtual environment had a higher score since there was a positive value, so it increased afterwards.
Okay,
Did
so
make
that
sense?
shows the change.
Yes.
But was it a change from here to here or from here to here? You know what I mean? Because the difference will be the same no matter where it is on the scale, the difference will be the same. So the question is,
yes.
Was the change from here to here or from here to here, from your point of view?
Yes, I don't have the exact results in my
Okay,
head
that's
right now, but we wanted to look at the difference because we wanted to get a ground zero. Since the questionnaires are kind of noisy, we wanted to see how it affected after the replica. So
It'd be
we thought
interesting to see both. I understand why you did it this
Yeah.
way. This is a good way to do it. It would just be interesting to see the absolute scores as well.
you might talk to me later.
Okay.
And
This is really nice
yeah.
work. I really
perfect,
like it.
thank you.
We take one more question.
Hey, I'm Nico Lee from University of Calgary. Very interesting, very impressive demo. And after listening to the entire presentation, I fully understand you want to smoothen the psychological feeling of the transition, right? However, I'm just wondering, like, just curious, did all the participants interpret like in the exact way you want them to do? Because like another interpretation can be, okay, I'm seeing gradually loading of the sense. Maybe this is some performance issue, right? Do you did you introduce the entire concept, or can you instantly understand? Okay, this is the way you want to do it.
There was really a case where one user didn't really was kind of interested in this smooth kind of transition, and he simply sat down at this fireplace and was looking in one direction, and so only the things started to change behind him, and he was waiting for the things to load around him. He thought it was a time process and just was waiting for it to end, and this was kind of one of the problems you said, so we implemented some kind of timer for the immersion to stop at one point and then redirect him completely into the environment for those cases. So there were users who, one user for example, who didn't really, right from the beginning, could start this smooth immersion in this way.
But most of the people had no issue understanding the concept.
Yes, so it was only one out of those participants which had problems with it.